Hello, everyone, and welcome to Life After the Military, a show completely focused on strengthening the mental fitness of veterans and their families, helping them transition from military to civilian life, and helping them overcome adversity. Our show is powered by Pivotal Moments. Go check them out at pivotalmoments.org to learn more. My name is Lee Elias, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Howie Cohen, and we're privileged to have United States Marine Corps veteran and current president of Intelligent Waves, Tony Crescenzo, on the show with us today. Tony currently serves as the president of Intelligent Waves, a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business providing end-to-end information technology solutions to public and private sector clients worldwide. Prior to that position, Tony served as the CEO of Intellidyne, LLC. In his tenured 30-plus year career, Tony has held strategic leadership positions at Software AG Federal Systems, CACI, and Initiative Systems. He also served as president and CEO of Inline Software and president and CEO of Illumatech. Tony was the founder and CEO of Analysis Frameworks and a partner at the management consulting firm Achievance, where he led the strategy practice for clients in the federal market. Tony is a member of the board of directors of the Northern Virginia Technology Council and is the co-chair of their Veterans Employment Initiative Foundation. Tony is a member and a chair of the advisory board of the Semper Fi Fund and a member of the Virginia Board of Trustees at the Nature Conservancy. That was the longest intro I've ever had to do, with the most words and the most times I've mentioned the letters CEO. Tony, welcome to Life After the Military.
Thanks. It's good to be here. Thanks.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you too. Now the show can begin and I can have fun with you, and so can Howie. So Tony, our first question is typical here. You had a little over 8 years of military service as a military Marine, and a non-commissioned officer and a leader. Please share with our audience how your Marine Corps assignments impacted and shaped you, and please share any stories that you have from your time in the service.
Yeah, that's so I had a very atypical Marine Corps experience, and it literally shaped both my approach to mental health for the rest of my adult life and my approach to leadership. I would probably say from a very early age, the Marine Corps was my first love. It was the culture, the brotherhood. I grew up in a Navy family, so just a word to the wise: if you join the Marine Corps to spite your parents, that's likely not going to work out well. But I had the privilege to have had some interactions with a Medal of Honor winner, a Vietnam-era Marine. And I was just so inspired by him as a young man that I really thought that was where I wanted to be. And so when I had the opportunity, I thought very hard about where I wanted to go with my career. I did know that I wanted to be a Marine, but I really wasn't sure exactly what all the things you could do were. But for me, I joined the Marine Corps with no expectations other than that I would earn the title and wear the uniform. And I had some really interesting early experiences. I am a graduate of Officer Candidate School. I was the honor graduate, and then got kicked out of college because I didn't have any money. I put myself through school. I worked as a part-time for the Galloway Township Police Department in New Jersey to put myself through school, working the 12 to 8 shift and then going to school. But eventually, at that point, there wasn't a lot of student loans for folks, and I was determined to do it on my own. So when all I needed to do was finish 4 credits to become an officer, but I just wanted to be a Marine. So I enlisted, and I thought I'll pick them up and I'll just go another way. And I did a first tour with a light anti-aircraft missile battalion. Really got a sense of what the fleet and the operational forces did. Got a sense of that brotherhood and how great things are. And I wound up transitioning to essentially be assigned. Imagine you have a background in law enforcement and intelligence, which is essentially what I brought to the Marine Corps. I was sent to clerk school to learn how to run payroll and unit diaries. This is way back in the days, believe it or not, with a portable computer, which fit in the Jeep. That was a portable computer back in those days. And after my first 2 assignments, I thought I was doing really well. Most people don't get moved very early in their career. You usually do a 4-year tour in your first tour. And I did 2 years and then 2 years with Marine Wing Weapons Unit 2, which is the organization that is responsible for all of the nuclear weapons that go on aircraft, or at least back in the day it did. But then I got a phone call from my monitor at Headquarters Marine Corps, and I was not asked. You don't get asked to do anything in the Marine Corps. You basically do what you're told.
Yeah, voluntold, right? That's what my wife always said, was voluntold.
So I wound up working as a Marine for the Naval, what was then the Naval Investigative Service, now what you know as NCIS, and spent 2 years undercover on a drug and fraud investigation, where my boss that I was assigned to work for was inventing people who didn't exist in the Reserve Manpower Management System, which had an audit every 90 days. And he would join them to the unit, create fake ID, not fake IDs, just take an ID from the safe, put his picture on it, change the name, and go to the same bank every month and cash 3 or 4 checks. And every 89 days, he would drop them from the unit. And essentially, I was sent there to go figure out how that was happening. So I also got cross-trained as a computer program so that I could understand what was happening behind the scenes. And as I was finishing up with that investigation, reporting to my control agent at NIS, there was a motor transport sergeant who was assigned to that unit. And the independent duty Marines are 10 Marines and a Navy corpsman. That's it. They're the guys that go to all of the funerals. They do events. They go grab deserters and bring them down to Camp Lejeune or wherever their court martial is going to be held. And as I was checking out, I had a conversation with this motor transport sergeant who apparently had seen another one of the staff using drugs. And so as I was checking out with my NIS control agent, ready to go back to the fleet and do my real job, you can imagine what happened next is I got extended to stay and then be involved in that investigation. And so I spent the next 18 months essentially walking into rooms I wasn't sure I was ever going to come out of. And I was your age, 23, 24, around this time. That role, if you can imagine being a young Marine, everyone in the organization that you're investigating is at least 2 ranks higher than you. The commanding officer of the unit doesn't even know what's going on. Only the battalion commander knows. And you're essentially spending your entire time becoming part of that group, right? We did things like lead them to believe that I had smoked opium when I was hanging out in Okinawa with my friends. And I had never been in Okinawa, right? We had to doctor up my SRB a little bit. And we made some arrangements to get my car repossessed so that the administrative chief who was committing the fraud would believe that I was poor and cut me in on the action. And we literally went to Broad Street National Bank in Trenton, New Jersey, and every teller was a 45-year-old guy. So I think he was not the most observant person because he literally walked in and cashed checks with a bunch of NIS agents standing around him. So I stayed on and spent the next 18 months essentially putting together both a conspiracy and essentially a conspiracy case against these 9 Marines who were bringing drugs in from different places. They were next to Willow Grove Naval Air Station. They had friends that would bring it in, and they would change they had the Navy corpsman on their payroll, and they would take the urine from our monthly drug tests and get it from the Navy corpsman and change it for their children's urine in front of me. And not the most sophisticated criminals in the world. For all practical purposes, they understood that I had a connection at the Naval Drug Screening Laboratory in Jacksonville, Florida. So we arranged to have the urine specimens intercepted. And before they could do anything with it, they came into a panic. So these knuckleheads were giving me personal checks for the bribes that I was supposed to pay to the folks in Jacksonville. Well, that all sounds great, right? It's kind of a thriller and it seems pretty cool, but the way that I describe that to young Marines, young sailors, young soldiers who are coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan is this. Imagine you're stacking up to enter a building. You're going to clear a building. Now, not every building has bad guys in it, and that's kind of the stressful part, right? You don't know what's on the other side of that door. But the good news is you're there with your friends. And you're never going to have closer friends than friends you go to combat with. Any veteran who's been there will tell you that. But imagine you're stacked up in your 12-man stick to go in that door, and someone walks up and says, hey, take off your body armor. And just put it down. Take off your helmet. You take off your helmet. All right, now give me your rifle. And then they hand you a pistol. And then they tell you, all right, go in alone. That's every day for 2.5 years. So the stress of that for someone at that age, looking back, it's, that's not something that most people go through. In fact, there's no VA support group for that kind of thing. I literally had to find a retired New Jersey state trooper who's now an NBA basketball referee who had a very similar experience. Now, that's sort of the good part of the story, maybe. The bad part is this is in the 80s. The Marine Corps was just post-Vietnam. Not every Marine who joins the Marine Corps looks like a poster Marine. And we had a lot of Vietnam veterans, combat veterans in that unit, and they were not going to go down very easily. And the Marine Corps is a very small organization. At that time, I think there were 180,000 total Marines, including reservists. So everybody knows everybody. Well, one day, the Naval Investigative Service comes in and arrests everybody, and they show them the charge sheet. And what's on the charge sheet? Me. Everything that they did is recorded, and my name is on all of it. And standard practice in those days was to transfer someone out of that area until they testified and the trial was closed. Except for a number of administrative reasons, that never happened. In fact, I was told, and this is after, by the way, that administrative chief was charged and convicted at a summary court-martial, but remained in the unit because it's very hard to find Marines to go on independent duty. And I was told I had to go back and work for him. Oh, and my response was, hey, oh yeah, I'm not even really a clerk. But because they needed someone who could make sure that the reservists got paid, I was forced to go work with him, under him, as his direct report. And the other Marines were relieved, but stayed in the area. So for the next several months, as I was being deposed by the defense counsel, I had to go to work every day and be in that building. Twice, I would tell you that I've been to some interesting places. I've been to the Middle East. I deployed with FAD Battery when I was in Land Battalion to Lebanon, to Beirut. The worst gunfights I was ever in were in Trenton, New Jersey. I was ambushed twice, almost killed twice. I had written letters to the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, to my congressman, and nothing seemed to be happening. So you can imagine the tremendous amount of stress you'd be under. Well, those guys get relieved and they get a new commanding officer. The captain who had run the unit, who wasn't aware of what was going on, was relieved for cause, primarily because he wanted to court-martial the folks who were committing the crimes. And for political reasons, the regimental commander didn't want to do that. So one of the most, clearly for me, the most high integrity officer I ever served under was a Marine captain who got kicked out because he made the right choice. So all this transpires. And when the new first sergeant comes in, who was sort of the senior enlisted guy that I would be reporting to, he's a friend of the old first sergeant. In the Marine Corps, if you're below a sergeant, you get what's called proficiency in conduct marks, and they go from 1 to 5 in increments of 1/10. A really outstanding Marine will be a 4.2, 4.3 proficiency in conduct. I came into that unit as a 5050 corporal and left as a 1213 corporal. In the course of me testifying, they were trying to find ways to impeach my testimony. And I was sent to the Naval Hospital in Philadelphia for a psychiatric evaluation because I have to admit, back in those days, what are you going to do? Shave my head and send me to Lebanon? You're going to have a bunch of guys ambush me in Trenton? I was pretty, at that point, pretty jaded. So I go to the hospital. The psychiatrist examines me. She asks me a bunch of questions, and I'm telling her that, hey, I'm actually undercover here, and she's looking at me like she's got to put me in a straitjacket. So I pick up the phone and call my NIS control agent, and she says, "Oh my gosh, this is real. I can't believe it. Well, I can't do much for you, but I can put you on medical leave for 2 weeks, and you don't even have to go back to the unit. You can check out on the phone." And I did. I went and hid for 2 weeks. At the end of the 2 weeks, the day before I was supposed to come back, I got a phone call from that new first sergeant who told me that I was UA. And UA in the Marine Corps is AWOL, as most people know it, that it was unauthorized absence. And I said, no, I'm not UA. I'm not supposed to be until tomorrow. So I was ordered to come in, and guess what? While I was gone, they found a whole bunch of things that I didn't do. In the military, you get lots of collateral duties. You're the recreation NCO this week. You're the mail guy next week. And so I come back, and here's all these things that I didn't do. And I was charged with in what's called office hours. And office hours in the military, or at least in the naval service, is the standard for proof is not beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's conducted by the unit commander, not by a judge. So I insisted on a court-martial. And I was court-martialed for disobedience of orders, failure to process mail, conduct unbecoming an NCO, and being 20 minutes late to work. And when I went through my court-martial, I was eventually found guilty only of being 20 minutes late to work. Now, interestingly enough, that court-martial took place and ended about 5:30 in the evening. And at 6 o'clock, I got a phone call from my monitor at headquarters of Marine Corps. Monitors assign Marines to their different billets and duty stations. And when he called me, he said, "Hey, I have instructions from, apparently my congressman finally reached out. I have instructions to send you anywhere in the world you want to go." And I said, "Send me to the closest place to my home of record, because I'm getting the fuck out of here." I was pretty much done with the Marine Corps at that point. Every link in the chain of command had failed me. And I had spent over 2 years every day wondering if that was going to be the last day that I was going to take a breath. And my payment for that was to be ostracized and abandoned by the Marine Corps. It was very bitter for a long time. Now, interestingly enough, the place they transferred me to was a reserve unit in Garden City, New York, doing essentially the same thing, 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines. And I had no idea what was happening. All I knew is I had been court-martialed, I lost my security clearances, and now I was filing records. I was a files clerk in a room with no windows, and no one in that unit I didn't go to poker games. Nobody wanted a PT with me. I was essentially just that guy from this notorious unit where all but 2 people were court-martialed.
Wow.
Interestingly enough, 8 months to the day that I reported aboard to that unit, the commandant of the Marine Corps, PX Kelly, walked in with a couple of artifacts. He had a commandant's letter of commendation, a check for $20, and a letter overturning my court-martial, a meritorious promotion, and a copy of the 4-page letter of apology that he had written to my mother.
Wow.
Apparently, this got a lot more attention than I thought it did. And I became, for a time, the subject of ethics classes taught in the Marine Corps for what had happened. And, what I learned from that, you can't undo the damage that had been done. But what I took away from that was this: choosing the right over the expedient almost always hurts in the short term. And choosing the right over the expedient almost always works in the long term. Yes, the chain of command between me and the commandant failed, but it held when it got to him. He did what was right, not what was politically expedient. And that, more than being in the Middle East, more than, spending some time in Lebanon, that had an impact on me that still continues to this day. I didn't even know. In those days, we didn't talk about PTSD. But like a lot of guys who get out of the military, we all do stupid things. So fortunately for me, I didn't get caught doing most of them. The Marine Corps is a different kind of culture. If you have interpersonal problems at work and you want to solve them, you just go out behind the squad bay. 15 minutes, a little exercise. Everybody has a beer. It's good. My first job out of the Marine Corps, I'm writing artificial intelligence code for pill bottle quality control at Merck Sharp and Dome. Great, giant building, 300 yards long. And I worked with a guy who was not very nice. He was condescending and one of these, Ferrari driving, no sock wearing cool guys that I didn't really like very much. And he said something to me and I did what any Marine would do. I looked at him and said, hey, if you talk to me like that again, you're going to get knocked out. And he did. So I stood up and so did he. And then he started running. So I chased him out of the building because, he needed a beating. He got in his car and he drove away. And of course, where he drove, to our office. And when he got to the office, he told our boss what had happened. I got the phone call. That's when I thought, oh, here's my new career with UPS. I walked into the office. The boss sat me down and said, look, I know Marines are a little crazy and, you weren't going to hurt the guy. And of course, me being me, I said, hurt the guy. If I'd have caught him, I'd have beat the shit out of him. And as it turns out, that our boss, I didn't know this at the time, and I'm ashamed that I can't remember his name now, was a 31 mission Vietnam Air Force combat veteran, Air Force pilot. He fired the other guy. If not for him, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And if not for him, I wouldn't be in a position to help other veterans who go through those kinds of issues. There's lots of folks that get out of the military. They do all the standard dumb things, drugs, alcohol, cheating on their wives, getting in fights. Everybody chases the adrenaline. You're looking for the rush or you're looking to be part of something. But that doesn't define you. That's a consequence of your service. And so for me, believe it or not, that and all the time it took, as bitter and angry as I was, what I took away from that was one of the most valuable life experiences that I've ever had, which was always focus on doing the right thing and don't fear the outcome. It may take 8 months. It may take 2 years, but doing the right thing is just in and of itself the right thing. But there are consequences to that. And I carry those consequences today.
I mean, that's an incredible story. I cannot imagine going through what you went through at that age. And for you to come out the other end the way you came out. I mean, I did some of this I knew, Tony, because we've spoken before. Most of this I did not know. And I will tell you that was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I guess the other thing, for some reason, I don't know how this missed. I went, this went by me. But so are you from New Jersey originally?
I'm originally from South Philadelphia. My grandparents emigrated from Italy and settled in South Jersey. Had a farm.
Son of a gun. Okay. Well, have we? I'm from the Union, a little bit north of where you grew up.
My roommate's from New Brunswick.
Oh, son of a gun. Well, my grandmother lived out there, so I was down there all the time. But so you just made my whole freaking month, Tony. Okay, so anytime I meet somebody from north of the Virginia line, of course, Lee is in a suburb just outside Philly in Havertown.
Oh, where at?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. I lived in New Hope and Newtown when I was working in Trenton. Those were the two places. And then if you know where Lumberville is up on the Delaware, there's it's like the oldest tavern in the United States, the Black Bass Inn.
Right.
Wow.
Right across from there is a footbridge, and there's this little tiny set of houses. And actually, that sergeant that I told you about, who told me about what was happening, we have been like brothers since that day. We spent a week there back to back waiting to see what was going to happen. We could literally go to the bathroom, stand back to back as we were going through testifying about all of this. And it's interesting. His son is now a staff sergeant and a recruiter. And that captain that I talked about who got relieved, What an incredible, just what an incredible man. So much integrity, who gave up his career to do the right thing. And you don't realize that when it's happening.
Yeah.
And for, this will really get you, Howie, for 30 years, I carried the guilt that guy lost his job. What a terrific leader. And I just figured he hated me because I ruined his career. I mean, basically, it was interesting. At one point, as you get a little bit of Stockholm syndrome when you do this kind of work. And I went to my NIS control agent and said, I can't not tell this captain what's happening. So we went in to tell him what we were really doing. And you know what he did? He didn't say a word. He stood up, walked down to the armory and grabbed 2 .45 pistols and handed them to us and said, I want you to be safe. To which I replied, well, no, I got one right here. But 38 years later, I'm still always in the process, right, of writing a book. And that book really is about how character matters for leaders. And he's the first person, other than my grandfather, that I mentioned in this book, even though I'm pretty sure he hates me and I haven't talked to him in 38 years. And one of the book editors called him to fact check what I'd said, and he wanted to get in touch with me. And I was terrified, just terrified of what he was going to tell me. And so eventually I took the call. And you know what he said? So I've been telling my kids about you for 35 years. I'd like you to be the guest of honor at my Memorial Day picnic in 2019. So I go up to, he's in Dillsburg, Pennsylvania. And his 2 little kids, when I was that young corporal who were, 2 feet tall, one of them is the aide de camp to General Dunford. He's a Marine major now.
Oh God!
And what a great sort of come full circle moment. That really was a cathartic moment for me. It got,
well, listen, Tony, I have
over something.
I have some great news for you, because before you leave this podcast, Lee's going to give you the title of your book. Right?
I've already got a couple written down, Howie.
and you'll
remember, Howie. You have to remember, it's a book by me, so it does come with a box of crayons.
Well, Lee will help you with the book title. I can get this is a tradition on every episode. We normally don't bring this up till towards the end of the episode when Lee brings it up. But since you're talking about writing a book, I'm just going to let you know that don't worry about the title. Lee's got you covered, man.
Yeah,
so
I've got 2 right now. Well, depending on how the rest of this episode goes, I might have 10.
Hey, Tony, so listen, what I'd like to do, I'd like to kind of talk about your transition from the Marine Corps into what you did after. And Lee mentioned a number of different positions with a number of different companies that you worked for. So I'm not gonna say all those again. Let me just tell you, folks, it's a lot. Tony has done a lot in his life.
I can read the whole intro again if you want me to, Howie.
So the first thing I'd like you to focus on, Tony, if possible, is just how did you prepare for your transition from the Marine Corps to what you first did out of the military? What went well? What did not go well? What did you learn from that? What would you do differently if you look back on it? Like what advice could you share with others? All right. And then if you could just also say how you also transitioned from some of these other companies to other companies and how that went. And my point is, one of the 3 things we want to do with this podcast and with the Charlie Mike channel is to help, military veterans transition to life after the military. Right. So whatever advice, guidance, direction, coaching, mentoring, whatever you want to call it, that we can give them to make that more effective. That's what we want to be able to do. So if you could share some of your insights into that, I think that would be awesome.
Sure. And just as a side note, one of the, and you don't have to amend my resume because it's already too long, but one of the things I love about my current job at Intelligent Waves is the founder was a big Wounded Warrior supporter until he found out how much money Wounded Warrior spends on overhead. So he started his own veterans organization, which is completely focused on one thing: transitioning veterans before they take off the uniform. We'll pick up veterans 18 months before their end of service, help them get a resume done. They get mentored by other veterans depending on branch of service and interest. We do about 100 of those a year. It's Warriors Ethos. What an amazing organization.
Oh, wow.
Completely focused on preparation for transition.
Okay.
I would tell Howie, you probably know this because you're a little older than me. Back in the late 80s, being in the military was not popular. This was not something that people thought of as sacrifice for the public good. In fact, when I started doing venture-backed companies and private equity-backed companies, and I would go up to New York and have conversations with investment banks, they'd look at my resume and go, "Oh, you're in the military? Couldn't get into a good school, huh? Sorry." It was never, "Oh, thank you for your service." In fact, when I had my high and tight Marine Corps haircut and I was on independent duty and I'd be out just, in Philadelphia or New York, oftentimes people thought I was a punk rocker. Nobody thought I was a Marine if I wasn't in uniform. So back then, there was no real transition from the military. I was in Garden City, New York. I was working at an instructor staff there. And I got a phone call from a recruiter in New York City. It's interesting that my transition to the technology world was working undercover in the Marine Corps. It was learning all of the languages and databases that they use so I could do that job. But it turned out I had some affinity for it. And I got a cold call from a recruiter from a company in New York. And, Howie, I don't have to tell you, or anybody who's listening to the podcast who's a veteran, you're never going to get rich working in the military. So you can imagine back then, I think I was making, $17,000 a year as a Marine sergeant. And I got offered at the time, which was an exorbitant amount of money, like $60,000 to go be a programmer for this consulting firm. So my transition literally consisted of the sergeant major, the regimental sergeant major, calling me in his office and saying, "Take off your uniform and get the fuck out of here." That was it. That's it. That's your transition. No, nothing. And it's a little bit like Wile E. Coyote going off the cliff, where you just all of a sudden go, "Wow, if I have interpersonal problems, I can't smack a guy or get smacked. That doesn't work." But it was, for me, it was basically a cold water, just jumping into a freezing cold lake. I had no idea, from your service that once you're inculcated into the culture, you don't just become a part of it. It becomes a part of you. And you can take off the uniform, but you can never take off that piece of you that earned that uniform. The things that you go through to earn it become a permanent part of you. But it did, I would say, again, in spite of all of that, the leadership lessons is interesting. People ask me, I do a lot of leadership coaching. I do a lot of leadership podcasts. And when people ask about, how I learned all this, my answer is almost always everything important and essential that I know about leadership, I learned in the Marine Corps. And my entire rest of my career has been a validation of what I learned and a refinement. Right? Because we know people like General Sattler, General Conway, retired commandant. I've had the privilege to meet a lot of outstanding leaders, General Mattis, General Kelly, Sergeant Major Kent. These are masters of leadership, and I will always be a student. But as I made that first transition, I was lucky. I happened to work for a Vietnam veteran who understood what it was like, who got out of the military at a time when it was even worse than I got out. Not only did people not care, they didn't care about you when I got out, but they hated you when he got out.
Right.
So I've always seen this as an exercise and pay it forward. That's what we do. We always take care of each other. So my first transition was a little rough, given that first episode, but I happened to have taken a job at a company that had been founded by the three gentlemen who founded the company that became GE Information Systems, just paragons in the business, more examples of great leadership and they really understood. They had not served, but they understood that I was coming from a place that was different. And so, you can imagine this was the largest technology merger of 1989 when they were sold to Amdahl. And the three owners would come once a month and take me to lunch and spend time with me.
No kidding.
Really trying to get to know me and understand what I was, what my goals were and how they aligned with where they were taking the organization. And I learned so much from those guys. That was just incredible. They were not hand holders. We weren't taking long hot showers together in the wee hours of the morning. They were demanding, but they really knew, how to lead. They knew how to motivate and inspire people. And that was a great lesson for me. So, my transition was not atypical in 1988. It would be very atypical today. There's lots of resources to help you transition. But the most important thing, I think, for most veterans who get out of the military is understanding their own value. You look at your military skills, you look at civilian skills, and you say, well, how does that really work? Well, it works just fine because at least in business, for leaders, two things matter most: competence and character. And actually, I'd put character way above competence. Coming from the military, what do you learn in the military? You learn how to adapt. We don't have fixed doctrine in the military. It's kind of interesting when everybody thinks it's just, the general tells the colonel tells the captain tells the lieutenant tells the sergeant. It's not really like that. In the Marine Corps in particular is like a set of Legos. Everything's built around the Marine Air Ground Task Force. So everything is mission focused. Take three here, two from there, put it together. And if you can sort of get your arms around that intellectually, that informs almost everything in business. Nothing is fixed in business, right? I just was on a panel, believe it or not, for a diversity symposium for the Federal Communications Commission. Who invites an old white guy to that? But the interesting part about that is that it all comes down to impact. So as you're transitioning out of the military, the question isn't, do you have exactly the skills that they need? The question is, can you create impact for any organization that you join? And impact can be defined in a number of ways. You can be an individual skills player, and you can be great at, let's say the easy one would be anybody who's got a data science background in the military, because they want you for a couple of reasons. People who come out of the military, great thing about the military is you get the same salary whether you work 1 hour or 24. That's the good news. Bad news is you're working 24. But the work ethic you bring from the military to the civilian world is much, much more intense and much more disciplined. Yeah. Veterans tend to they have a lot of discipline. And companies want that. They want adult supervision. I mean, look, I still look around and wonder how I became the adult supervision in all these companies I went to. So for anybody that I mentor transitioning, I always tell them two things. Don't find, especially if you're not retiring, if you're coming out after 8 years, don't look for the job. Look for a job. Get a taste. Fix a position in space and time so you can see what the world is like. And you can use that as a pivot to find your dream job. But you've got to get that first one under your belt because you really have to learn civilian culture, etiquette. It's been easy for me here at IW. People ask me often, why go to this company? I tell them two reasons. One is I don't have to learn new pronouns because I'm old. And the second reason is our firearms policy just got updated, and it says if you bring a gun to work, wear a coat, because we have a plurality of veterans here. Lots of, I got guys sitting down the room from me who were in the ditch with Saddam Hussein when they pulled him out of the hole. That's kind of a homecoming, right? So you want to find places where people understand you. Yeah. You also want to find places where you'll be challenged a bit, right? You don't just want to jump back into a military culture. You want to jump back into a hybrid culture so you can make a smooth transition, not a jump off a cliff, Wile E. Coyote transition. That's the best advice that I would give anyone at this point.
You're reminding me of a couple things, Tony. Like, first of all, it's so refreshing to hear that the first company you joined had the strength and quality of leadership that it did. Because, be very candid with you, a lot of my experience in corporate America, both working, in government contracting and in leadership and management consulting, is there's a lot of folks out there making a ton of money that can't find their way out of a freaking paper bag. I mean, and I'm not making this shit up. I mean,
I absolutely agree with you, Howie.
And so to hear that you had the opportunity to work for folks that actually could lead and set such a great example for you outside of the uniform, outside of the military. And thankfully, I had the very much same experience, right? I mean, Bob and Rob. Right. Morgan Franklin Corporation was led by two guys who cared deeply about the men and women who worked in their company. And I had very similar experiences with them. And you know the story. Hell, they hired you and Ed to help me and help a number of us be better, in our transition from the military to business and understand business principles and so on and so forth. Who does that? Who makes that kind of investment in their people other than a highly caring and effective leader? So I've seen both examples, but unfortunately I've seen more of the first, where there is a lack of leadership in corporate America. And thankfully, we've got guys like you who are in leadership positions and taking the right care, not only of the people in their companies and organizations, but are also mentoring others to be better leaders and take care of their people. And I think that's absolutely awesome, Tony. And I really applaud you for that. I really do.
That's a great sort of tee up, Howie, to this. And it's something that the one thing, and everything I learned late in life, you talk about, I've done a lot of things. Well, I was a CEO for the first time at 33, and people go, ooh, that's really cool. And I remember when I was 33, people would say, wow, you're a CEO at 33. And I would look at them real confident and say, hey, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence at 33. It's your problem. I never said I was a good one. The mark of mentally healthy people and people who can progress in their career or even in their own personal life is really about reflection, being self-reflective. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. You teed me up for, you talked about Bob
and Rob and Morgan Franklin.
Bob and Rob. Yeah, damn it. I'm sorry.
It'll come back. It'll come back. Hey, listen, you mentioned Thomas Jefferson. I gotta give this a plug too. Lee turned me on to this absolutely awesome series about John Adams. It's an HBO series from years ago.
Oh, the one with what's his name? The guy from Sideways.
Paul Giamatti.
Yeah, he's awesome. What a great actor.
Oh my God, that's and I'll tell you, man. And it makes me just want to study Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. But those are, the founders of our country were incredible men and really deserve our time to study them and understand where we came from. It's fascinating. But so listen, let me transition, Tony, to.
Wait, I got to stop because I remembered what I was going to say, and I think it's important.
Cool.
When you talk about leaders who care, like Bob Morgan and Rob Franklin, who are two of the best people I've ever met, what they know and what it's taken me a lifetime to really understand that as business leaders, when we hire someone, we're not buying them. We're not even renting them. We're essentially borrowing them from this community of talent. People talk a lot about how companies create their own communities. Or Google is this great company with free stuff and nap pods and massage chairs. It's a community. But what we often miss is that we also impact positively or negatively the communities where our employees live and work. And whenever we hire someone, veteran or non-veteran, we're borrowing that person from the community of talent. And in today's world, no one stays at a company very long. 3.5 years in the federal market is about average. So at some point, we're going to return them to that community of talent. And the real question for leaders in business and in government as well is, do we return them back to that community of talent better than we found them, the same, or worse? Because everyone we put back, every person who goes back to that community of talent, if we've helped them be better as a leader, better as a person, to have a better understanding of the world around them, to understand why contributions matter, then we're having a positive impact, not just on our business, but on the world. And Bob Morgan is a terrific example of that. Bob gave a leadership talk at Teledyne for me. He opened it with, let me explain who I am. I'm Bob Morgan, the founder and CEO of Morgan Franklin. For 3 years, Tony gave me therapy. Now I give Tony therapy. That was his opening remark. But he said something that people still quote from that company, and that is, karma's only a bitch if you are. If someone asks you for a favor, do it. Don't expect it back from them, but trust me, and this is Bob speaking, my experience is whatever you put out there, you're going to get back. And I would echo that. I've had that same exact experience. Don't worry about what you put out, and don't worry about what you get back. Just worry about what you put out. And because we're all paying it forward. I had a young former Marine sergeant, 2 tours in Iraq, tour in Afghanistan. 3 weeks after he joined our company in Teledyne, jumped off a parking garage, the 4th floor, tried to commit suicide. Just a broken in body, mind, spirit. And every day for 3 months, Ed Abner and I would go visit him in the hospital. After about the first month, his entire battalion that he had deployed to Iraq with, every enlisted Marine in that battalion came out to see him. And today, he's doing fabulous. Now he's helping other veterans, right? That's what we do.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, you wanted to transition to something else.
Well, no. Listen, we can, we'll go wherever the conversation takes us, right? And I echo everything you have to say about Bob. And look, he's been giving back since he was in college, right? I mean, after he overcame his bout with cancer, which almost killed him. Yeah. I mean, Bob has been on a mission not only to make the organizations he's part of better and develop people around him, but he is constantly looking for ways to give back to the community. I mean, he has such an incredible record, and that's what Pivotal Moments is all about, right? And I completely agree with you. I think we have many philosophies in common, and one of them is, when you go into an organization, whether it's the military, whether it's corporate America, whatever it is, I don't care. I think your responsibility, if you're going to be in some form of an formal or informal leadership position, is your responsibility is to leave that organization better than when you got there. Your responsibility is to develop the men and women around you to be better at whatever they want to be. And if you help them achieve their goals, if you help them achieve their vision, you're going to be successful, right, at everything you do. And I completely, wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said. And again, more people, I wish more people thought and acted that way. It's unfortunately, it's not always the case, but I wish they did. And Tony, listen, and I don't want to be, I would love to have an introduction to the gentleman you spoke about. And if he's open to it, invite him onto this podcast as well. I think that would be a compelling, it'd be a compelling recording and session with him. All right, so I'm going to move on to Achievance now. I find it fascinating, and listen, I know and we've had Ed. This is for our audience, not so much for Tony, but we've had Ed Abner, who was also a partner of Tony's at Achievance. We've had Ed on a podcast that'll come out at some point here in the near future. But I would love for you to kind of describe what you did at Achievance. I know that connected you to Morgan Franklin, and so what you did at Achievance. You had some tremendous impact on many companies and helping them build their strategic focus. And the other kinds of consulting support you provided. Because again, I think this is a neat thing to describe to some of our veterans who are listening to this, because this is another way where they could translate what they did in the military into the corporate world. Because when you kind of strip things down, a lot of what, and I'll give you a perfect example, McChrystal Group, right? The team of teams methodology. It is everything we did in the military. Everything that we did in the military, just packaged a little bit differently. So my point here is that there is, not only have you been trained and developed as a leader and a highly effective leader, but you have so many skill sets that have been developed in you, whether you realize it or not, that will translate into life after the military. And so I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you did that with Achievance.
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about how I came to be at Achievance.
Cool.
And some of the questions I got about it. So my two partners, Ed Abner and Ken Wolf, who was the founder, had been at Achievance for quite a long time. That was pretty much Ed's career after he left EDS. Ed is, for those who haven't seen Ed's podcast, Naval Academy graduate, retired commander, worked at EDS, just a terrific, brilliant, not just brilliant intellectually, but even his grandchildren call him coach. I had hired Achievance right after 9/11. I was running a spinoff of a public company focused on the commercial market. The commercial markets went absolutely dead after 9/11. And so we had to refocus our entire company very quickly. And we brought in Ken and Ed, and they did a fantastic job. They were just amazing. And they're also very highly networked. And those of you who are listening to this, your network matters. And I'm going to tell you about that in a couple of minutes. Some very interesting network things that have happened in my career without, it's not planned. It just happens. So I had run that spinoff. It got purchased back by the parent company and then got sold to IBM. I went and did a series of other jobs. I was the executive vice president of IMTS. It was an 8A. We had graduated from the 8A program. And I'd stayed in touch with both Ed and Ken because they're just brilliant folks. Ed, a brilliant operator with lots of experience in business. Ken, a brilliant marketer and theorist around marketing, sales, demand generation. Just, two very, very amazing people. And we had stayed in touch. So I called them when I was getting bored. And I said, look, I'm looking for something new to do. You guys know everybody. Who do you think I should be talking to? And Ken called me and said, well, come to lunch. And lunch turned to dinner, dinner turned to drinks. And 2 days later, I was a partner at Achievance. And people would ask me, wow, how do you get to be a management consultant? And having spent time on Wall Street, I can tell you, there's two paths to being a successful management consultant. You can A, go to an Ivy League school, graduate at the top of your class, and go carry some other guy's bag for 10 years while you work 80 hours a week. Or you can go be an actual operator in a business and work 100 hours a week for 20 years. Both will get you qualified. But that's really the two ways. It's about experience. So for those listening, seeking out experience, stretching yourself, pushing past your boundaries matters. As it turns out, Howie, I would describe my role in management consulting as telling an awful lot of stories. That was 80% of the job. There's a methodology to it. And I can't agree with you more about how military strategy and tactics translate into the civilian world. I recruited Lieutenant General John Sattler for two boards, primarily as my strategy guy, right? As the CEO, my job is to develop and execute strategy. And in almost every company, you're not going to have anybody to bounce that off of unless you're in the Fortune 100. You just don't have a depth of strategic thinking. So I called General Sattler and he's like, so what can I do? I'm a military guy. And he said, well, strategy, wherever you go. And it's very, very true. You think in terms of things like asymmetric warfare. We're a service-disabled veteran-owned business about to graduate from the program, which means we've grown significantly. But I'm still fighting essentially a business war against companies that have more administrative staff than I have people. Well, you don't win that fight force on force. You win that fight by finding their weaknesses or using their strengths against them. And understanding that perspective from the military, I still remember, I don't know if the Army has it, things like SMEAC, how do you write an operations order? Situation, mission, execution, administration. No different in business. When we build an annual operating plan here, it's all focused on what is the execution infrastructure? How are we going to communicate? And they are 100%, from my perspective, transferable from the military to business. And the other thing about that is in the military, nobody does just one job. Right? Anytime you're going to rehearse any kind of operational scenario, you've got to recite what everybody else is doing. And that gives you a perspective that somebody who came straight out of college or came out of high school is not going to have, because you always have to understand commander's intent. In business, it's leader's intent, but in the military, it's commander's intent. And by that, I mean, the general doesn't say, go take that hill. The general tells you, we need to take that hill because the three behind them are strategic and we've got to get around this corner. And you have to hold that ground to protect the flank of the rest of the battalion. So not only do you understand what the job is, but you understand both the context and consequences of failure. And that's what inspires people. There's very little difference from leadership in the military and civilian world, other than, if you don't do what I want you to do here, you get fired. If you don't do what I want you to do in the military, you get arrested or something worse. But it all comes down to, if you look at what is the center of gravity, if you distill it to its essence, what does a CEO do? Well, from my perspective, a CEO envisions a future that does not yet exist, and then gets everyone required so inspired and excited about that future that they not only make it real, they make it their own. And the only way you can do that effectively, military or civilian, is through empathy. It's being able to see the world through the eyes of others and then let them show them what the world looks like through your eyes. You can't bridge the gap between where you are, where people are, and where you want them to be if you can't meet them where they are and show them the way. And that's really the center of gravity, both in the military and otherwise. You've all seen the movies where you got the tough NCO screaming at people. That's not really how it works. It's all about love when that stuff happens, right? It's the inspirational leaders. I have these talks with civilians a lot. You get a lot of civilians who love to talk about the chain of command. Got to honor the chain of command. Don't go around your boss. Well, that's normally true, but in my experience, chain of command really works better from top to bottom, where you're pushing information down. But my military experience, ask any Marine, when the shit hits the fan and the rounds go down range, people don't follow the chain of command. They follow the leader.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think Lee's heard this before, but and I sense you've done pretty much the same thing. Even as a young kid, I kind of view everything through a leadership lens, right? And I study the people around me, coaches, parents, whatever. And then as I got older, in school, and as I got older in the military, the leaders around me, and what can I learn from them? What to do, what not to do. And then when I saw really effective leaders, I would always ask for some time, where I could get some mentoring, some coaching from them, right? And I remember I was a battalion commander at the time, the 112 Signal Battalion in the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, USASOC at Fort Bragg. And General Schoolmaker, who I had been around a number of times in my career previous to that, was the commanding general of USASOC. And I just had so much respect and admiration for that man. And so, and we had a little bit of a relationship. So I'd say, hey, sir, listen, I would love to get on your calendar sometime and just kind of pick your brain on, leadership philosophy, command philosophy, whatever you can do to help me be better at what I want to do. And I'm in his office, and I think I forget if he's from Montana or Wyoming, but he was a cowboy, right? And had this big old honking truck, that probably got about 5 miles to the gallon. But I'm in his office, and we're talking about leadership. And he says, "Hey, Howie, you've ever been around horses?" I said, "Hey, sir, I'm from New Jersey, man. I've never been around them, other than you go on a horseback riding every once in a while, right?" And he says, "Well, look, I find that leadership's a lot like being around horses. If you get out in front and you start pulling their reins and start to bring them along, they're going to resist. They're going to dig in, and you're not going to move him an inch." He says, "If you just get out and start walking, in most cases, a horse is going to follow you, if nothing else, just out of freaking curiosity." He says, and so you got to, as a leader, you got to be out front and you got to lead. You got to be out front and you got to, show your folks the way. And that's exactly what you're saying, right? In combat, in any kind of stressful situation, men and women are going to follow the leaders. Sometimes out of curiosity, and sometimes out of just admiration and respect, because they think you know what the heck you're doing, But yeah, I completely agree with you, man.
I've learned, again, through experience, and from my perspective, experience is what you get when you don't get what you want, is that leaders don't make great companies. companies make great leaders. Like leadership is a conversation between the leader and the led. I teach a class here, Ed and I taught a lot of classes when we were in Teledyne. And we talk about different leadership styles: democratic, servant leaders, laissez-faire, commanding. And I would ask people, what do you think my natural leadership style is? And invariably, I would get democratic or servant leader. And that's not my natural leadership style. I'm a Marine sergeant. I'm a commanding guy. But that's your natural style is a tool in the toolbox. And the more tools you get in the box, the more effective you can be.
Absolutely.
So you use the leadership style that the team needs at that particular time. And that becomes a conversation between leader and led. You know, my philosophy is 4 pillars, right, to success as a leader: trust, communication, transparency, and accountability, wrapped in an envelope of integrity. Leaders set the example, rule number 1. But if you communicate and there's no trust, nobody listens. If you trust you and you don't communicate, nobody knows. And accountability matters, right? Everybody thinks that the boss isn't accountable. But when you start to show accountability, then they start to feel like it's not a pyramid, it's a circle. And that's when you start to see great things happen. Cool. And that you can take away, that's a Bob Morgan approach. Cool. Rob Franklin's a little bit different. Rob's kind of crazy. He's on my board now. I still think he's crazy. But Bob was the last bastion for everybody. He was everybody's sort of Uncle Bob. You could always go to Bob for advice. That's the role, right? That's what we did. I'm sorry, we're turning this into a leadership podcast, not mental health.
That's okay too, because Lee and I were passionate about that as well too. So and that's okay. And you're right. They were just a phenomenal leadership duo, you know. But one thing I'll say about Rob, he was a master of the freaking Excel spreadsheet, man. You know?
Still is. He wields it like a cudgel.
Everything boiled down to how I could put it into an Excel spreadsheet for Rob, you know? So, and I love him to death, man. We joke about it all the time. Hey, Tony, you serve on a number of different boards, the Northern Virginia Technology Council, which I'd love to hear more about. You also are very involved in the Veterans Employment Initiative Foundation as part of the Northern Virginia Technology Council. I'd love to talk about the NVTC, and I'd love for you to talk especially about the Employment Initiative, Veterans Employment Initiative Foundation. You know what it's about, what it aims to do, and I know I still have to connect. You know, we have connected, but I still got to get a commitment.
Montel?
Yeah, between me and Vonzel, we just keep missing each other. But he seems like a very sharp. And by the way, I actually talked to Steve Jordan the other day.
He told me.
Yeah,
Steve was he's the OG executive director of VEI. What a great guy!
Oh, he's phenomenal. So we're booking him for a podcast as well too. But he is. I just loved talking with him, and he just reveres you. And but anyway, if you could tell us about NVTC and the Veterans Employment Initiative Foundation, I'd love for you to share what that's about.
Yeah, the only bad thing I can say about Steve is he's a terrible judge of character. Otherwise, he's a terrific guy.
Well, and plus he was a naval officer, right? But
a helicopter pilot. Yeah, and his roommate, his college roommate, is a guy named Joe Dumford.
You are kidding? He did not tell me.
They went to LSU together. Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Oh my God!
It's a small world, and it gets smaller as you get older.
Oh my God!
Yeah, so the Veterans Employment Initiative, that resonated well with me. I was, I didn't join the board of NVTC and then become the co-chair of VEI. I was asked to be the co-chair of VEI, and the requirement is you have to be on the board. The Veterans Employment Initiative is 8 years old, and in those 8 years, we have literally put 18,000 veterans to work.
Holy cow! I did not know that.
Thanks to Monster.com and Military.com, every veteran who sends a resume to Military.com or USTechVets.com, that resume gets jumped to the top of the stack among NVTC member companies. And the Northern Virginia Technology Council is the second largest technology trade association in the United States.
Wow.
Behind only the Consumer Technology Association, which is really kind of a sister organization. The CEO of CTA literally attends all of our board meetings. So imagine that the Northern Virginia economy is an outcome of NVTC's work. In particular, the CEO who just retired, Bobby Kilberg, who served in 4 different presidential administrations and is really wired into everything that goes on. I might get some pushback from others, but in my opinion, Bobby Kilberg is almost solely responsible for the Northern Virginia technology economy here. Wow. And help build it, along with the board members. But the entire focus of NVTC and the NVTC Foundation is matching veterans with jobs. So they work with Hiring Our Heroes. They work with every major skill bridge, getting veterans exposed to real businesses. Hiring Our Heroes, for example, will take your last 180 days of active duty and let you go work for Amazon or UPS or us. And then you go visit a bunch of companies. So you get this great exposure to what work life is really like. And in the VEI, it's literally the same thing. We've got over 400 and 460 and change member companies. Those requirements go into a pool. We work with the Virginia Values Veterans Program. Now the veterans nonprofits, particularly now as we draw down troops from in the field and things start to become less visible, they struggle for relevance from time to time. But veterans are always getting out of the military, even when we're not at war. And it's now become kind of an ecosystem. Steve Jordan runs, he's the executive director of a nonprofit that helps veterans get their VA benefits. Right. There's another gentleman, Andrew Hong, who's the ED of a nonprofit that helps veterans who have convictions. They got caught doing something and they go to veterans court.
In fact, I met Andrew. I met him a couple weeks ago, and I've invited him to come on as well too. Fascinating guy. Boy, I really like him. He's
a young guy, man. But you talk about accomplishment. He knows everybody.
Yes.
And he does a biweekly. It's not a podcast yet, but he should be, called Meet Your Neighbor.
In fact, I'm going to be on it tonight, Tony. He invited me.
I'm good.
Yeah,
I was looking for you in the last one. No, so we'll be the 2 old white guys.
Actually, I apologize. We have hockey practice. That's why I missed last week. And so, son of a gun, I forgot. It's Tuesday. No, if it's tonight, I'm good. Yeah. The last one was on a Wednesday night, so I missed it because of hockey. I coach a youth hockey team, so I missed it. But I'll be on the one tonight. So
Tony, Howie, and I often miss things because of hockey, but that's just a common theme on the show for us. But that's another thing that binds us together.
No worries. So yeah, VEI, great organization. I'm privileged to be a part of it. I really wish I could do more, but Von Zell has done an amazing job coming in and taking over for Steve and dealing with some of the other issues that have now come up with veterans employment organizations. Warriors Ethos, as I said, picks up veterans from 18 months before they make the transition. And the board there is just incredible. They're a Medal of Honor winner, a retired Marine 2-star. The executive director, I think, had his 68th surgery not long ago. So people who've been there, done that kind of an organization. As you know, Howie, there's this ongoing, I think, push-pull with the VA. Veterans don't want to go get counseling from the VA because the counselors have never seen what they've seen. Right? You want to talk to another veteran. You really want to get. You can only talk about that kind of stuff with somebody else who's been through it, and it's a struggle because where do you find it? We all feel like it's just us. We're in that dark room and there's nobody else there. But once you reach out and realize there's a lot of people who deal with that, and there's not as much of a stigma as you think there is, especially when you run into folks, like me, who have made a career in spite of some of the things that have happened, but you use it to your advantage. And now it's an opportunity for guys like me and guys like you, right, to help the younger folks that are coming along. I think of it as the highway of life, right? We're just 10 exits down from where they are. And our job is to illuminate the road before them so they don't get off.
You're being very kind to me. I think I'm more than 10 exits. I'm probably about 100 exits down from some of these guys.
Well, I'm getting older and gentler now, just trying to be more politically correct.
No, hey, listen, that I am very, very interested in linking up with Vonzell and learning more about it and how we can help promote it. I think there's probably, now that I think about it, there's probably more things we can do as a Pivotal Moments team to create more content around the VEI, and and so people understand, because I mean, 18,000 veterans to work.
18,000.
That is absolutely phenomenal. And so we have got to, I'll be very candid with you. I was talking with Bob Morgan a couple of weeks ago, and another one of our advisors, Robert McCreary. I don't know if you've met Robert, but we decided there's so many different organizations out there that we could focus on, but we felt that, hey, we just got to start prioritizing on maybe the top 3, 4, or 5, and the Northern Virginia Technology Council is one of them, right? So I'm going to start putting a lot more focus and emphasis, and I'll reach out to you, Tony. Maybe we can sit down and kind of strategize a little bit, because my point being is, what can we bring as a content creation and production and distribution organization? What can we bring to the game to help tell that message and promote that message even more, so that even more veterans are seeking the help of the MVTC veteran initiative. That would be that appointment initiative. That would be, I think that's something I got to definitely focus on.
We'll have some answers for you anytime.
Cool.
So, Tony, we've been talking about this kind of the entire episode. As our second to last question, but with all the organizations you've been part of, you've experienced, there's been a clear service to people that have served. So we know that you were the COO and CEO of Intellidyne, but I think you could put this question across the board. The reason we're bringing up Intellidyne is because 25% of Intellidyne's workforce are military veterans. And part of what we try and do on this show is, we believe that organizational leaders and businesses listen as well to be better for hiring veterans. So what are some of your quick tips or comments on how a company can become military friendly to accept military people into their ranks? Speaking from as a CEO to another CEO that might want to be hiring military.
It's a great question, but I have to caveat it by saying Intellidyne, I think, was the Monster.com 9th best company to work for veterans. And I've upgraded. I now work for the 2nd best company
very
for
cool.
veterans at Intelligent Waves with 70-something%.
Wow.
Veterans. The best advice that I could give anyone who seeks to hire veterans is to get some veterans on board and start working on what does that first year look like. Most companies, they do onboarding and they do orientation. And onboarding is a day and orientation might be a couple of months. But when you go to a new command in the military, maybe not true for guys like Howie, colonels, real important guys, but you show up at a new command as a young E2, E3, E4 in any branch of the service, and you get a battle buddy. You get somebody to walk you through
absolutely
the entire place for a year. Veterans veterans like that. It's part of our culture, right, to help each other. So if you're looking to hire veterans, you've got to be able to map veteran resumes to civilian resumes. We're not good at writing resumes. We're just not. We can hire somebody to do it, and it might be okay. But whatever you see on that resume is an iceberg. You're seeing the tip. And the totality of value that a veteran brings from any branch of the military is much bigger than what you're seeing on that resume. And good companies don't hire for a job. They hire for a career. Not everybody stays for a long time. But if you're bringing somebody on to do one particular thing, you're kind of shortchanging yourself anyway. Go back to Intellidyne. The best first job at Intellidyne anybody could ever have is the receptionist. Receptionists have become vice presidents, directors of marketing, business analysts, salespeople, because you're always looking at what is the impact that they can bring to the table. So having a soft landing place for veterans, and by soft, I mean not so much therapy and group hugs. What I mean is making the transition easy for them by having another veteran ready to help them come across from one to the other organization. If you're coming right out of the military, you always want to go to a company that has that kind of focus, that really understands veterans, because that's your first one out. And it's a flaming reentry if you're coming into an organization that doesn't understand what you bring to the table, what you can do. Most of those companies, I don't know how many of us there are. I think we're only, are we 3% of the population, Howie? Something like that. Not a whole lot of us relative to the entire population of the country, but you do run into them from time to time. And having, we had a military resource group at Intellidyne. We don't really have one at IW because it is essentially like being in the military. We are a defense contractor, and I describe my job as so close to the mission that we're so close to the mission that to get any closer, I'd have to put on a uniform and grab a rifle. We're literally in austere places all over the world doing things you might read about in the news. So that one's an easy one because veterans look at that and go, wow, guys like me, I'm just changing uniform. Right? I'm taking off my BDUs or my camis or my dress blues and I'm putting on a polo shirt. So if you're a veteran, look for companies to start there because of course they get you. We use the same language, even here. I get emails or ask people if they understand what I'm saying, and I get back good copy 5x5. It's not, it's like coming home. For companies that don't have that, you want to. I'll give you a great example. So you mentioned I'm on the board of trustees of the Nature Conservancy. How I got there is kind of a weird happenstance. The CIO, who at the time, the then CIO, was French. He had been the CIO of the city of San Francisco before he came to the Nature Conservancy, the world's largest conservation organization, second largest landowner in the United States, 4,000 employees worldwide, 18 veterans. So they're a progressive organization. They want to create diversity. Veterans are a diversity category. My wife, who worked at Accenture, Booz Allen, and Price Waterhouse, when she made her money, decided I'm going to give all that up and I'm going to do my passion thing. That's the environment. She took a big pay cut and she works in the CIO shop at the Nature Conservancy. So the CIO is lamenting the fact that they don't have enough veterans in TNC. And she says, well, my husband's really big in all this veteran stuff. You should give him a call. So, went to meet him. We sponsored a couple of events. Interestingly enough, Howie, there's a woman who wrote the quadrennial, in the Quadrennial Defense Review, wrote the climate change section, happened to be working at that time for Lieutenant General Sattler. Right? So everybody knows everybody. And had a little bit of a conversation. Intellidyne sponsored the event. Next thing I got was a phone call from the CIO saying, hey, can you go to Montana and meet with our Veterans in Nature Service Group? We want to create a veterans program. So I go out and I bring our template from Intellidyne and start to work on that. And then he says, hey, would you mind coming to Hawaii? Because we're going to have another meeting there. And I'm like, well, okay, I could go to Hawaii for a week. And so I helped them build that Veterans in Nature Service Organization. And now when I get phone calls from, if I'm mentoring a veteran through Warriors Ethos who has an interest in, and a lot of veterans want to be outside. I want to be a game warden. I want to be working in the environment. I want to be a scientist. The Nature Conservancy will give you a zero interest loan if you want to be a farmer and you're going to practice organic farming. So now I find myself as a bridge to these different organizations. But the whole thing turned on not whether or not I was going to be a good environmental steward, but it really turned on how I could connect an organization that really sought that level of commitment for veterans and wanted to open the aperture. Right? And there's a lot of organizations that do that. So again, if that's you, call Ben, tell him you need my number, and I'll come out and help you start your veterans organization. But there's a lot of folks who are, very committed to that. Howie, I know you are, right? And for me, I always think back to that Air Force colonel and who didn't fire me, and that captain who gave up his career, not for me, but to do the right thing. And this is just paying it forward. Every person who comes out deserves that opportunity. I hear a lot about affirmative action and why do veterans get a preference? Well, hey, guess what? Put on a uniform, go do the things that we did, and then tell me that you don't deserve at least a little preference in getting a job.
You know, Tony, I'm always saying in a lot of my posts and a lot of my work, you know, as a civilian, and again, my wife served in the Air Force, but I've been a civilian my whole life. We need to serve those that served us. Even if you don't understand fully what they've done, they deserve that. You know, this is something that was instilled in me by my father, who grew up with the World War II generation, and he revered these guys. And you know, I grew up to stories of you know that it wasn't a perfect time period, and it obviously wasn't a you know a perfect military at that time. But he said, you know what, those guys did save the world. And he goes, and we don't do enough for them. And then that obviously expanded beyond just World War II to everyone that served the past, present, and future. But I'm committed, and as a civilian, to serving those that served us. You know, and I'll tell you, you know, for those of you listening, I don't think I've said this on this show before. You know, as a business owner, as a speaker, as someone who goes out there a lot, you know, I have to find a lot of anchors. And what I mean by anchor is something that I can always look to ground myself. And whether I'm having a great day or a rough day, the anchor for me is the military. It's I'm not somewhere I don't want to be right now with bullets flying at me, and someone is all the time. And that's how I stay grounded every day of my life. And again, I have Howie knows this. I have lots of military paraphernalia surrounding me in my office right now, just to keep that top of mind. Now we're going to come to Howie's favorite part of the show.
Well, hey
Go
Lee,
ahead.
just before you do that, if you don't
Yeah,
mind, and
please.
I'm gonna, you know, I probably should have done this sooner, but I just want you to understand about Lee Elias, right? So Lee, and for those of our listeners who have listened to other podcasts, Lee is an entrepreneur, has two product companies that are very hockey centric. One of them is actually a sunglass company that I think puts out a phenomenal product. But let me tell you something that Lee, just to show you his commitment to what he just said. And we just put out we just posted our podcast with the Skate for the 22 Foundation. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to see it yet, just very briefly, these are two young men up in the Boston area who served in the military, want to give back, want to help veterans, find that camaraderie, that sense of collegiality, that sense of purpose that they no longer have after they took the uniform off, and essentially use the game of ice hockey as a conduit to do that. And so what they do is, now they just work in the Boston area and out to a certain radius from Boston, but they actually had created a league and invite and recruit veterans to play hockey. And it doesn't matter whether you're like an A player, like a collegiate or a professional player, or you're a goon like me, a D player who can barely skate. They bring these men and women into this league and mix them. So not all the A players play on A teams, and not all the, if you're a D player, you're playing with A players, and they put them all together on these teams and they play hockey. And that's how they're helping literally save lives. And I'm not overstating that by any means. And listen to the podcast, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But what the point I want to make here is that that Lee, one of his product companies, the sunglass company, are selling sunglasses, and a large percentage of those sales is going to the Skate for the 22 Foundation that help provide them the funding to keep this thing going. And so Lee is putting action behind his thoughts and his words, and I think that's commendable, and I thought it was an appropriate time to get that out there. So Lee, thank you for what you're doing, because first of all, I've got a couple pair myself. I absolutely love them, man. And but the cause is something we are both so passionate. All three of us are so passionate about. But Lee's actually putting action behind his thoughts and his beliefs, and that's what we all need to do. So anyway, Lee, back to you.
No, I appreciate that, Howie. Look, the last thing I'll say on that is, we have Memorial Day and Veterans Day, and that's just every day for me. That's just how I always viewed it. And I don't think 1 or 2 days is enough. It's an everyday thing for me. I think while social media is wonderful and horrible at the same time, just posting nice things is not enough, right? You, all of you that serve, keep us safe, and I am committed to making sure I serve you however I can. And one here's a transition for you, Howie. One of the ways I serve you is by making book titles on this podcast. So, Tony, first time ever I've had to fill out two Post-its with book cover titles. So I've got a few for you. The serious one here is character and competence. You said that earlier. That one's not that funny, but that's actually a pretty good title for a book. The funny ones, I've got 2 of them. Howie, I'll let you decide which one you like more. The first one is, if you bring a gun to work, wear a coat, by Tony Crescenzo. That's a good one right there. I'd be very curious to know what that's about. My other favorite one, I think, Tony, this is one you're going to like. It's called Aggressive Negotiations: How to Solve Your Problems in 15 Minutes.
Or less.
Or less. Yeah. That's what I like a lot. How to solve your problems in less than 50 minutes. By Tony Crescenzo. That's got to be there.
Since Howie brought this up, I'll tell you this story. Ed may have told you this story, Howie. So my grandfather, my uncles, my cousins, everyone in my family are mechanics. And when I was 13, my father took me aside and said, "Anthony, it's a good thing you're smart, because if you had to make a living with your hands, you'd effing starve. And you can't work here, go to school." So when I was in college, I went to college in New Jersey, Stockton, Richard Stockton.
Oh, cool.
I would come back from time to time and stop by the garage and see my dad and my uncles and my cousins. And I walk in one morning, and I grew up in South Philadelphia, and it is essentially every day is a Sopranos episode. My parents divorced when I was young. My dad dated a woman whose husband was in jail for life plus 100 years, who just got out about 5 years ago because he was a mafia hitman, and he had 3 sons. And when my dad was dating this woman, they were like my older brothers. In fact, we're very close. One is dead. One is essentially was hit with a shotgun blast, and so is institutionalized. And the third one is the consigliere of the Philadelphia Mafia.
Oh, geez.
And and I have this cousin who was about the same height, weight, age, and temperament of Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. And I walk in the garage one afternoon to see my dad. He's not there. My cousin's standing by. They used to have this big, almost like a safe from a Western movie. And he's eating his lunch at the table in the garage. And he says, "Hey, well, what size pants do you wear?" "What size pants do I wear?" "Why? What size pants do you wear?" "Oh, 30, 32 at the time." He opens the safe, turns the dial, takes out a pair of pants with a belt in it. And he looks at the pants and goes, "Here you go." I'm looking at him going, "What's this all about?" He said, "Well, I was at a club last night and some guy tried to rob me. So I took his gun, his wallet, and his pants. You can have the pants." and when I was a Marine, I had to go pick up nobody really, if you keep your ID card, they can't charge you with desertion. So a lot of guys that just take off, they keep their ID cards. These 2 young privates were caught. They were in the roundhouse in Philadelphia in the jail, where my uncle was a police inspector. He was head of homicide for the Philadelphia Police Department. And so I went down to visit with my uncle for a few minutes. I'm wearing civilian clothes. I got a van with a little bar on the floor, put shackles on. And I pick up these 2 kids, and I don't have to be at Philadelphia Airport till 7 o'clock. I'm going to go have lunch with my dad. So I go down to inner city Philadelphia, pull up. It's 94 degrees out, crack a window. "Hey, guys, I'll be back in an hour." They're shackled in the van. And I walk in the garage, and there's nobody there. I'm looking around, and here's this sort of guy who looks like an older version of Popeye. And he says, I said, "Where's Butch?" Because my dad's name was Butch. We're all, my grandfather, my father, and I are all Anthony, but Cheech, Butch, and Tony. Nobody, only my mom calls me Anthony. So I said to him, "Hey, where's Butch?" And he looks at me and he goes, "Who the fuck are you?" And I said, "Who the fuck am I? Who the fuck are you?" And he picks up a letter opener and says, I'm the guy that's going to stab you. And I pull out my 45 and go, I'm the guy that brought the gun to the knife fight. And my father walks by and says, Anthony, don't shoot the customers. And just kept walking. He never even stopped walking. Well, this guy runs, he goes, oh my God, Anthony. And he picks me up in a bear hug and starts just jumping up and down. And I'm like, who is this guy? And my father says, that's Stanley. He hasn't seen you since you were a little kid. Well, it turns out Stanley took his girlfriend to the mall and they had a fight. So he went home and got a butcher knife and stabbed her 27 times, which really upset his wife. Stanley just got out of jail for murder. And just one sort of extra anecdote to that story. My father never had an accounts receivable problem as long as Stanley was in the garage.
Oh my God.
That's the environment I grew up in.
Oh, jeez.
I'm playing the Sopranos theme song on my phone right now.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Just keep talking.
That's every Sunday.
Yeah.
I'll give you one more. I know this will get cut, and it should get cut from the podcast. But there's a bar in Philly that has in the basement of this bar. They had a show every weekend. Johnny and Eddie and Mickey or something, and they would do Sinatra and Elvis sets. And when we did the Elvis set, they would pass around women's underwear so you could throw your underwear at it. And I was there with my cousin. I had been out of the Marine Corps for a while at this point. We had 15, 16 people. Bars in Philly close at 2 a.m. But if you want to drink after 2, you can go to a private club where you pay a fee, and they're all run by those guys. So my cousin says, oh, we're having a great time. Let's go to this bar. And I'm too old to stand in line. I don't like the velvet rope. I don't do that kind of thing. So I said to my cousin, I don't want to stand in line. He goes, oh, we won't have to stand in line. So we all pile in the cars. We get to the place, and my cousin's wife, who's driving, says, I'm tired. You guys go. I'm going home. He leaves us there. And here's this 100 people in line in this velvet rope at 3:00 in the morning. And I'm about to go find a taxi. And my cousin walks right up to the bouncer and he goes, hey, John, how you doing? And pulls him right in. So we're sitting at the bar. It's probably 4:00 in the morning at this point, and gunshots, glass is breaking, rounds are going off. People are running for the exits. Tables are getting turned over. And my cousin is just sitting there having his drink. So I grab him by the back of his collar and I go, John, we got to get out of here. And he shrugs me off and goes, they ain't shooting at us. And sat there for 15 minutes.
That's the next book covers. They ain't shooting at us. Tony Crescenzo. So Tony, this is going to be an interesting transition, but I have to do it. So Pivotal Moments seeks to strengthen mental fitness worldwide. How do you personally define mental fitness? And please share some things you do to strengthen your own mental fitness. That is our final question that we do ask it of every guest. But mental fitness. What does it mean to you?
I have to tell you, I really thought about this a lot when I got the questions. As I mentioned earlier, right? Self-reflection is the mark of every good leader,
right?
Which means you really have to look at yourself and say, what could I have done differently? What part of this is mine? I got a great resume. You see some really cool things in there. Well, one of those companies, I ran one of the first companies that I got dropped into from a venture capital firm was 2 guys who came out of Steve Jobs' failed company, which most people can't even remember if you're not old enough. Next Step. He started a company to compete with Apple, all object-oriented. And they had invented an object-oriented architecture, which was really cool. But you know what they don't teach you in the Marine Corps? There's no class in retreat. And that's the first time I learned that sometimes you're just not going to make it. And I got walked out of a company where I was the founding CEO, got fired from it. People sued each other. It was an awful, terrible experience and the most instructional experience of my entire career. If not for that, I would not be where I am today. And interestingly enough, we got a lot of our funding. The 2 founders, one was a Presbyterian kid from Chicago, red-haired, freckle-faced guy who didn't think Presbyterianism was for him. So he did a comparative religion study, and where did he land? Islam. So he decided that he was going to make the Hajj, grow a beard. It was all good. We were having conversations about it. And we were raising money, but we were raising money from wealthy families. And I spent a month in Switzerland at private banks for wealthy Saudi families. And they had a gentleman doing their due diligence for them, Sami El Arian. How would that name sound familiar to you?
No.
So it turned out Sammy was a college professor at the University of South Florida, computer science guy. And as I said, my time in the Marine Corps also involved being in the Middle East, in the Shatila refugee camps when all the refugees were being killed. They sent the Marines in to escort them out. That was my first foray into doing anything like that. And it turned out that Sammy Al-Arian was a Palestinian, and he had been in one of those camps. So we had a lot in common. I traveled all over the country, all over the world with Sammy raising money. And post 9/11, turns out Sammy was the president of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So imagine that, the 3 weeks after that happens, you get the FBI coming in, looking at everybody's computers, and a lot of that money was not money that we really wanted. And Sammy wound up in Gitmo for a while. But as I read through that issue of mental fitness, it's not mental health, it's mental fitness. Anyone who's seen those kinds of things or been in those kinds of situations, it changes you. It changes you fundamentally. It doesn't necessarily have to change you for the bad, but mental fitness is like physical fitness. You can be out of shape, but you can get back in shape.
Yes.
And as I mentioned before, my first 10, 15 years out of the Marine Corps, no, I never had a problem. Never thought about anything. And then I started to have these recurring nightmares that would just not go away. And it was the same thing over and over again. And I was terrified to go to sleep. And I would get in these very dark places. For me, I talked about the guy whose son that I worked with, that sergeant who retired as a CWO4. His son is named for me, and he is my daughter's godfather. He was my guy that I could call at 3:00 in the morning when I had an issue, and he would walk me through it. He would help me through it. I went through a series of therapists. I actually met a guy who was a Vietnam veteran, and he fired me as a client because he said I triggered him too much. So it was really difficult for me because I had a lot of anger issues. I had these, always looking for the adrenaline rush kind of thing. And mental fitness is tied, body, mind, and spirit to physical fitness. And so, as an outlet for my otherwise negative things that I was doing, I took up alpine mountaineering and use that as a way to connect with not just nature, but when it's interesting. I'm quoting. This isn't from me, but this is from the first American to climb K2, and he said, "When I stand at the top of a mountain, and it's taken everything I have and everything I am to get there, I feel the truth of who I am, and connecting with who you are, who you really are." Not with all the things that have happened to you, but with what you are as a person, is a touch point. You talked about the anchors, right? You need a lot of anchors. Every friend is an anchor. Your spouse is an anchor. And you've got to be willing to tell them who you are. None of us wants to expose, but the regrets that I have are never for things that I did. It's for things I didn't do. That young man that I talked about who jumped off the parking garage saw some people do some things that were wrong but didn't do anything about it. And that's what ate at him. And I still go through these periods in my life where no matter how great everything is going, you just want to lay down and do bad things. You just, you look at it and go, what's left? That's being mentally unfit, but you can exercise your body, mind, and spirit and come back to it. My periods, I call them just my dark times, stretch out more and more. I talked a little bit about Howie, that captain that I went to go see. And I was so relieved when I found out that he didn't hate me, and he introduced me to his kids as this, great guy that he knew. I couldn't talk to him for a year after that. It just affected me so badly. And I picked up the phone and I called my friend who's a retired CWO4. He's my lifeline, and I'm his, because we went through a lot together. But just because today's not good doesn't mean tomorrow's good, and you're not alone. You know, I felt alone because I went through an experience that most combat veterans don't go through. It's easy to have courage when you're with your brothers, because you help each other, you hold each other up. And when you're alone doing that, it's bad. It's just not something you want to go to. But when that happens, I do realize that there are others like me, and I sought them out. It took me 30 years to find the guy who wrote the book about, he was a New Jersey state trooper who went undercover for 3 years, and it just ruined him. But he found his way out. And I contacted him after I read the book. I sent him an email. Lieutenant General Sattler, you know, I bought a trip at an auction with him and the retired Commandant General Conway to go hunting and fishing in Montana, and took a bunch of Marine veterans with me from our company. It was a great trip, but you know, you're having a few drinks at the end of the day, and General Sattler talked about how great the NCO Corps was, and I had just a little too much to drink, and I went off and, you know, described for him what NCOs were like when I was a Marine. And if not for General Sattler and Sergeant Major Kent, who happened to have served 3 or 4 different tours with my friend who retired as a CW04, I come back from work going, "Hey, I just met the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps," and he's like, "Yeah, I went to boot camp with this." Nobody. But you know, Carlton Kent is an icon, and his entire focus in his life right now is on veterans, and they became, you know, another set of folks that I could go to when I was having issues and challenges, and they helped me get back into fitness. Right? So you're throughout your life, even if you never served in the military, you're going to go through tough things. We all do, and they're going to impact you in ways that you can't imagine. The one thing you can't do is ignore it. You have to be able to embrace it and say, you know what? Everybody's screwed up. Every family has something going on. Right? We're all a work in progress, and you got to be okay with that, because tomorrow's another day. It literally is another day, and you just got to get through that 3-hour period. And I've been on the receiving end of a number of those phone calls too. And there's no privilege greater than helping another veteran who's having issues get through them. So don't do it. You know, my one suggestion for everyone who suffers from these challenges, no matter if it's military or otherwise, is to never assume that you're alone. There will always be someone who's in your corner, and all you have to do is ask. You know, I said it before, and it sounds, you know, pithy and cliche when I say I Forrest Gump my way through my career, and I kind of did. But I'll tell you a story about Bob Morgan and Rob Franklin that you probably don't know. So among the many challenges that I've gone through in my life, I went through a very awful bill of divorce in 2009, just as the economy was failing. And Morgan Franklin was suffering the same way as every other company. They were cutting costs. They were cutting outside consultants. And I walked into Bob's office, and Rob Franklin was standing there. And I said, "Hey guys, I gotta talk to you. I'm going through this awful, bitter, terrible divorce, and I can't concentrate. I'm losing weight. I can't sleep, and you're spending an awful lot of money on me. And maybe you want to get a different partner, or maybe you want to put it on hold, or maybe you just want to get rid of it. But I can't in good conscience go forward with this without telling you that I'm in diminished capacity." And they didn't say a word to each other. They just looked at each other. Bob turned to me, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Hey, we're partners, and partners take care of each other. So you do what you can do, and we'll carry you. And then you do, when you're better, you'll carry us." And they did. So when Bob called me and said, "Would you be on the board of Pivotal Plays?" He already knew the answer, right? The answer to Bob and Rob is always yes, because I saw who they were, and they saw something in me that they took a risk, financial risk. They took a risk with their business because I was helping them develop strategy. That means a lot. And when you find people like that, you've got to cultivate the shit out of them to the point where that someday you're going to become one of them. You know, Howie's nominally in my age range. Howie, Ed, and I are within probably 5 years of each other, I'm sure. And you realize as you get older that your perspective changes a lot. And you start to look at when you get into your 60s, you start looking backwards more than forwards. And what you realize is, and I've done this, I actually started this about 10 years ago at another company, teaching leadership. And leadership is about empathy, right? So it's understanding what it's like to be someone else. Is like teaching your wife golf when you're the CEO of a company. It never works out. It's good on paper, but there's always lots of crying and yelling, and everybody goes home unhappy. So I decided to create what I call the Leadership Masterclass. And the thesis for the class was, come in and sit with my leaders in my company as an accomplished person who's been through all the things you've been through, and answer this question. What would you tell yourself 25 years ago to stop yourself from doing all of the stupid things that you did during that time? And the interesting thing is the folks we've had in this program, Bob and Rob Franklin, one of their other board members, Jim Hunt, who's now on my board, and the retired director of NCIS, who I didn't know until he retired. When he had become the director, I worked on a program to build the law enforcement information exchange for NCIS, and I got to meet the director, which was kind of a thrill. Great guy, Dave Brandt is his name. He's been on the TV show, hangs out with Mark Harmon, really great guy. But after we won this particular program, he retired from Deloitte and became the law enforcement partner. And I brought him in to work on an FBI program that was 20 times the size of what he was doing at NCIS. And we won that particular opportunity. So he called me and said, "Hey, let's go to lunch." And we sat at lunch, and he said, I remember when we met, your name is unusual, and it was really familiar to me. And I thought I knew you. And then I checked, and I did know you. And I was the director of undercover operations from 1980 to 1987. And I just want to apologize for what happened to you. And that was a cathartic moment for me. But if not for people like that who remembered what had happened, and the willingness to share that, this is not. I have to tell you, this is not easy. It's not easy to tell that story about Trenton. Invariably, people get some of the facts wrong. That's one issue. And the second is, when you're a leader in business, that's probably not the first thing you want people to hear about you. But the benefit outweighs the risk. And what I've learned is, if you're an accomplished person, you've probably had a lot more challenges than people know, literally. And sharing those is a life lesson for all of us. We learn in three different modalities. About 70% of our learning comes through our own experience. 20% comes from the experience of others. And 10% comes from books. And that 20%, if you can synthesize that into your own life perspective, is something that I think we all have a responsibility to pass on. It prevents people from making the same mistakes we did. So asking for help, not being afraid to say what's true for you, and finding that cadre of folks who you can affiliate with and you can really talk your truth to matters. It's what's kept me going through most of my career. Dark times, good times, always knowing that there was a number I could dial where someone would be on the back end, and really being aware of what was happening. Now I know what the symptoms are. I start to get a little angry. My tolerance level goes down. I don't sleep enough. And then the next thing I know, I'm looking for a bar fight because that's fun and therapeutic. Well, it's probably not the most healthy thing in the world. So you channel that into other things. But I didn't learn that from a therapist, and I didn't learn it from a psychiatrist. I learned it from other veterans. I learned it from other people who had been there. So, my advice is seek out those who've had similar experiences and just go talk to them.
Well, hey, listen, Tony, I want to sincerely thank you. I've been looking forward to this session for a long time. I joined the Pivotal Moments team back in January. And when I had several conversations with Bob, one of the first names he brought up was yours, and wanted to connect me. And then you and I have spoken probably 3 or 4 times since then. And when we finally got this recording booked, it couldn't happen fast enough for me. And I'm just so appreciative for you doing what you do, you dedicating yourself to, as you said, pay it forward, because I believe so much in that. It's funny, as you reach a certain point in your career, and I'm talking about military career, it's about how do you make yourself, how do you achieve a certain level of success, right? And then something happens, and for me, it happened about the time I got promoted from captain to major. Is okay, Howie, now it's no longer about you. It's about people helped you get where you are today. So now it's about how do you help those people get to where they need to get to? Because if you do that, you'll continue to get the things you're supposed to get. And so when that clicked for me, it became, okay, how do I, like you said, pay it forward? How do I help others? And so you have dedicated yourself, you're almost your entire adult life to doing that. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your perspective and stories with us. It's so valuable to anybody who will listen to it. And listen, I cherish the opportunity to continue to grow our personal and professional relationship. And based on some of the things you've mentioned today, I definitely want to follow up with you on a number of things. But thank you for being here today, and thank you for sharing and being so vulnerable with us and sharing your thoughts and perspectives and experience with us. I know anybody who listens to this podcast will get value from that. So I appreciate it.
It's a privilege to be here. Thank you, Howie.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Again, you've been listening to Life After the Military, which is powered by Pivotal Moments. And you can learn more about the organization at pivotalmoments.org. And to find more inspirational, entertaining, and educational content, check that website out. For Howie Cohen, and Tony Crescenzo, I am Lee Elias. Thanks so much for joining us. And make sure to keep an eye out for more episodes soon, wherever podcasts can be heard. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day, everybody.